Awesome. So, welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for taking time. Can you quickly describe what you're building and who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. It's great to be on the podcast. Really appreciate you inviting me. I am the co-founder and CEO of Thorian AI, and what we do is we are experts at data processing, and we use that expertise to automate complex compliance tasks. So basically, our customers tend to be either in the finance space, in the public policy space, anyone who is engaging with highly regulated industries. How do they get the information that they have internally into those regulatory filings that take them so much time? So basically, for us, AI is a tool to enhance human flourishing, make people much more efficient, and automate some of those tasks that people would rather not do.
Okay, awesome. Very exciting. How did you come to this company? You mentioned this is your third startup. What's your story?
Yeah, so my I kind of roundabout way the way I got into entrepreneurship. So background is in public policy, and my interest has always been in how people and organizations work together, how people make decisions, and that's what I focused on in my policy degree. From there, I went and worked in finance in New York. So I spent 7 years as an analyst looking at a variety of deals that were often public-private partnerships, so integrations between the public sector and the private sector. As I was working in finance, I realized that while I was a very good analyst, I was not particularly good at sort of the small culture things related to finance. I was always one to question rules. I kind of broke the mold a little bit in some of my like profile. I wanted to figure out why stuff worked the way that it did. How could we could be more efficient? And in finance, it's very much like you wait your turn, you follow the rules, you do your best work, you make your way up the ladder in an iterative fashion, and that just sort of didn't really work for me. And I had kind of an aha moment, maybe in year 5 or 6 of my 7 years in finance, where it was I am not getting really a very efficient return on my labor working in finance. I really wanted to own a bigger piece of what I was doing, and I wanted sort of the responsibility and the pressure associated with being the founder of a company. So I spent the next year and a half learning about entrepreneurship. I read a bunch of books. I took an accelerator course for people with full time jobs after work for about 6 months. And then I started a company in an area that I knew well, which was education technology. And from there, that company went through several iterations as I was really new and I made a ton of mistakes. And we eventually got a bunch of funding from the NIH. We pivoted that company several times. We helped a number of students at historically black colleges go to grad school in the biomedical sciences. And that was a really nice success, and really sort of taught a lot of resilience in terms of, hey, there are a lot of things in this process that didn't work. The grad school and the biomedical sciences angle on that company was our third or fourth angle. And I eventually brought in an established player in the education space as a co-founder. That company ended up folding when my partner, who was in her 70s, she ended up retiring, and I moved on to another company, which was a fintech company. And now Thorian is sort of a finance facing, but not finance only, sort of finance and government adjacent, really focusing on this like government filings and some of these complex processes. So my co-founder at Thorian was also with me at my prior company, which was called Private Market Labs. So he and I have been together for a long time and figured out how to work together really well.
Awesome. Very cool. You mentioned owning your output. Uh, what are you owning as part of building Thorian? What in the market are you owning by the time you reach success, by the time you reach scale? What do you expect to own?
So you can think of ownership in a couple of different ways. I think when I was working in finance, I thought of ownership as I want to own the equity in my own work. So I want the direct result of my success or failure to be building wealth and building something that had an impact on society. When you think about like sort of what Thorian is doing in and of itself, what we're really trying to own is a piece of this market that helps people in less technical spots in organizations get a lot of value out of using AI, using advanced data techniques, but without knowing that they're using advanced data techniques. So a lot of people sort of see promise in AI. They know AI is coming, they know AI is here, they know the world is going to change, and yet when they start using AI as an institution, they don't necessarily get a lot of business value out of it. So we see statistics from places like Deloitte, right? Deloitte says 70% of organizations that have done an enterprise scale AI implementation over the last year are still 12 months away from hitting their ROI on that implementation. And we've also seen some statistics where a lot of people at the VP level and above, so these are often the generalists, the leaders, the people who are not so much in the trenches with the code, a lot of those leaders, we've seen a decline in enthusiasm, about a 15% decline in enthusiasm year over year from 2024 to 2025 in AI in general. And part is because they're just not able to use the very best of AI. So, I think when we were chatting before, you mentioned, hey, who are the winners and losers in this space? And, why is what you're doing really important? And I think for us, this is one of the core reasons why we're building what we're building at Thorian. So, what you end up having is a situation where the gulf between the haves and have nots in AI is about as big as any gulf I've ever seen with any core technology. So you have a group of people who are really AI native, really experimental. They understand how to code, they understand data science, and those people are getting massive returns on their time. You see people who are, experienced coders are the ones who are getting the most out of vibe coding, for example, right? And then you have groups of people who are using, base model LLMs to enhance their research, and they're getting a ton of value on an individual basis, but they don't know how to translate that into massive business value because they don't have the data skills and the coding skills in order to do that. There are a lot of organizations that are currently being left behind. And what we've done with Thorian is we're saying, okay, let's help people bring their data operations and their AI implementations forward a little bit through some automated data processing steps, which is sort of our bread and butter. And let's find an ICP that is complex, oftentimes manned by super senior, less technical people, and really important where accuracy really matters. And that's how we ended up in the compliance space.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much for giving me that context. It makes a lot of sense. I want to shift a little bit towards the category you're creating and the market insight that sort of started this journey for you for Thorian. What is a category you're creating and who benefits from it?
Yeah, so I think the category is really I, it's one of those things where we're going to see kind of what the meta category of these application layer AI companies are going to look like over time. I think for us, our category is AI enabled compliance
Mhm.
and AI enabled compliance across the board. And I think one thing that's really interesting about categories in the AI age that we're sort of very, very early on is that when you think about like Web 2 and Web 3 companies, you'll have, defined verticals. And those verticals are, associated with the tech stack and associated with a specific market. And that tech stack is well suited for a specific market. AI, by its nature, is kind of a horizontal technology. It applies really well in a large number of contexts. So the challenge as an entrepreneur is how do we pick a lane? How do we pick an ICP? How do we pick a customer that allows us to focus, get the referrals that we need, get the feedback loops that are consistent, and build a reputation in a particular industry while also taking advantage of the breadth that AI can provide. So you have to go both vertical and horizontal to make, in my opinion, to do really well in AI. If you're too verticalized and you're too niche, you are at risk of being taken over with the next model update. And if you're too broad, it's going to be very hard on a go to market scale. So you have to kind of find that sweet spot. And that's one of the things with Thorian. We've really been, making these kind of like micro pivots and adjustments as we move forward with the company because that piece has been so, so, so important. And so for us, when we say, AI enabled compliance, that is focused on the financial sector right now, but we also could see how the techniques that we're using work very, very well with people filing forms for being a lobbyist or people putting out forms for being a nonprofit. And we've worked with people in both of those spaces. Just because we're focused on finance now doesn't mean that the techniques aren't generalizable across. So I think when we think about categories, I think that like vertical horizontal piece is going to be a very interesting sort of like thing to pinpoint as you move forward. And for investors like you, I have a lot of empathy because I think it's changed maybe some of the mental models that investors are using as they're evaluating companies. And so, how the future companies look and the way that they approach their niches and how investors evaluate them, that's an ongoing question that I think we're seeing in the market right now.
Very true, very true. I think it's changed a lot of markets. The evolution in AI has really radically shifted entire models for every industry, not just
Yeah.
the way they operate, but the way in which they're evaluated too. So it really is very interesting times. I'll shift the conversation to the questions we had picked.
Yeah.
Uh, so what is broken in the current system about the current system right now?
So I think one particular piece that we haven't touched on yet is a lot of compliance functions, particularly in finance, are falling under the category of product called like ops admin, operations administration, and the funds that are using these types of tools. These are very big, very expensive tools, and those tools are very good at sort of tracking what your LPs are doing, figuring out, and monitoring your investments. They're great for storing information, etc. And they're not exactly well formatted for compliance or compliance automation. They do that stuff as sort of a side benefit, but for organizations that are a little bit smaller or even medium sized that don't really have a need for a massive ops admin piece of software, it can be hard for them to get access to even baseline compliance software, let alone like the top of the line stuff that we're building right now. And so we want to be able to help organizations that are saying, hey, what we really want to use is HubSpot actually for our CRM, or we want to use Affinity, or we want to use Salesforce. And we can help organizations doing that and storing their data however works best for their organization, and then bring that data from wherever it's being stored, whether it's in a CRM, it's in a cloud drive somewhere, it's on Dropbox, wherever it is, pull it together, process that data automatically so they don't need a data scientist to get the data ready to go, and then use that data with these agentic processes to answer compliance questions. So when you talk about what's broken, the thing that's really broken is the productization of this market and where it is right now, and what that means for the organizations in terms of the tools that they choose to use. So an organization could choose to say, hey, I would rather use a CRM that's better for tracking leads, because that will help me find great investments. And then at the same time, we can use Thorian for our compliance processes, because we don't necessarily need to find a CRM or a marketing software that also does compliance. So it helps people almost like unbundle some of their services a little bit. I think that's kind of an interesting concept going forward.
Very cool. Very cool. So what behavior did you notice in your customers?
So I'll talk a little bit about yeah. So yes, what behavior did I notice in my customers? Um, Broadly speaking, I have seen a lot of organizations controlling AI use in a very top down way,
Mhm.
and in particular, organizations will say, hey, like, we're going to do these three or four things with AI, and we're going to experiment, and we're going to set a strict set of policies, and then we're going to restrict what the individual contributors are using AI for. The problem with that strategy is, because AI makes individuals so much more efficient, it's very, very hard to get people to stop using AI when it makes them better at their jobs. And so you have this like sort of rise in shadow AI.
Mhm.
Shadow AI, basically unmonitored, the organization doesn't know what's going on. In part because organizations are sort of holding on so tightly so that they don't lose control over the process. They're losing control because they're holding on so tightly. So for us, we think a lot about how do we create environments where people can use AI safely, but also experiment. So when I write about AI, I write a lot about sort of how do we help organizations create much broader boundaries and then take the best ideas that they find within those boundaries. In terms of Thorian, right, it's mostly just people using manual processes that they've used for a very long time, and we can help automate them and free up the time that their senior partners can use. But in terms of like a meta commentary on how people are using AI, I think that's one of the biggest challenges in the space right now.
Very cool. Shadow AI. I've never heard that. That's the first time I've heard that. I'm gonna keep that in mind. Uh, do your customers use specific phrases to describe any problem, any situation that they have? What about the way your customers think about their work influences the way in which you build your product?
Yeah, I love this question, and when you sent it to me, I got really excited because I thought this was like a really interesting framing exercise. I think especially with non-technical teams, and especially executives at non-technical team in not on non-technical teams, it's really interesting because they'll say we have a data problem. They'll use really broad language. They'll say, hey, like we want to use AI. We think AI is cool, but we have a problem with our data. Our data is messy. And it's funny because they're saying that, but what they might have is a data formatting problem, a data storage problem, a data chunking problem, a data retrieval problem. They might have much more specific data problems than they can articulate. But my role when I'm in sort of like founder led sales mode is I need to sort of listen past the jargon that they're using because the jargon that they're using is sometimes underdeveloped for the industry that we're in and the technology that we're using. And so that's sort of one of the places where that gap actually manifests itself is in the language that they're using to describe the problems that they have. So as a founder and as you know when I'm in sales mode, I have to listen very carefully to the sort of subcategory descriptions of where the problems are. Okay, well, where's your data stored now? What data are you trying to use? Those kinds of questions. Or what are you doing with AI right now? It's oftentimes language that invites a lot of follow-up questions. And I think, you use the example of HubSpot and inbound marketing as, language that people grew to use as they created this new category. I imagine that in the early days of HubSpot wasn't hearing people say inbound marketing. HubSpot was saying, well, the spend on our marketing when we send ads out isn't very good, but sometimes people visit our website and that's really cool and we would love to get more traffic that way, and or the data is showing that. I think that we kind of developed this language together at more precisely over time, but maybe a signal that new language is about to be developed is that we don't necessarily have the words right now, at least on the customer side. We don't always have the words right now to describe what's happening, and I think that's like super interesting and one reason why like it's AI is the coolest place to be building right now.
110%. I couldn't agree more. Mainly because I think the way you describe it, of language being underdeveloped, I think that is a very, very key insight. Is humans are evolving beings, right? Like any other organism, we are evolving every day. So the challenges that we face are going to be new too. And sometimes the models we use or the language we use to describe something is going to be outdated. It's going to be something that it's the example of uh, people thinking in the 1950s that AI is going to look radio-like, right? Like the latest technology that they had is how they're going to describe what
Yeah.
the best of what they can do is going to be. The same thing with problems. I think defining problems is not always very difficult, very easy. It's not a given. Sometimes people struggle with that. And that's where I think founders with their unique mindset and unique instincts can come in and say, hey, I see a bunch of people describing a problem they're having with ad hoc words and ad hoc sort of descriptions. And they sort of create an understanding of what the underlying problem is, and then being able to very specifically solve that problem is what is gives birth to new vocabulary, new behaviors, new markets. Uh, I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly how markets are born.
Love it. It's like we're all founders, investors. We're all in, and even people who are buying software for the first time, right? We're all in kind of like pattern matching mode. So, and those patterns take a number of different forms. We're trying to match the feeling we get when we're describing a problem with the feeling we get when someone's describing a solution, or we're trying to match what we see in a founder, and is that founder, do they remind us of a successful founder we invested in before, or when we're listening for a problem as a founder on the sales side, are we hearing stories about problems that feel similar, even if they're not really sure how to use the language to describe those problems? Because if we can bring that language to light, if we can describe things in a new way, we can frame things for the customer and they respond, that's a really important signal. And so our job as a founder is to like listen for that signal and make sure that we're tracking it the right way, that the signal is actually consistent, that we're not listening for false signals or putting signals out there and then hearing ourselves back to ourselves. You really have to listen very carefully to the customer. It's super hard. It's like it's really hard, but it's one of the most fun things about this work.
Absolutely. Yes. So moving on, who is being left behind now and how is that being shown in the data?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit early to see kind of how AI is changing the world. I think it's likely the people who are late to experiment with AI and are not thinking about. I think it's very easy to be afraid of AI. I think if you're afraid of it, and I mean, it's healthy to be afraid of it. I'm not saying don't be afraid, do everything with AI. I'm saying there's a way to experiment and be open minded and stare at stuff you're a little bit scared of that helps you grow and get better. And especially if you're less technical, like I don't come from a technical background at all, but I try to learn as much as I can because it helps me engage with where the world is going. And you can say, hey, now that I've seen it, there is some stuff that I'm still scared of, but there's also stuff that I'm really excited about. And so I think that in a world where like people don't engage with it, or when people set it aside, the people who are going to be left behind are going to be like the smaller organizations or the less technical organizations have a risk of falling behind because they're not going to be experimenting in the same way, or they're not going to have access to the data and technical talent they need to experiment well. So we're trying to solve this problem in the compliance space, but there's also a lot of great companies that are thinking about this gap, and I'll be excited to see how those companies emerge in the coming years.
Very interesting. Yeah. Uh, this one's very important for advice. What advice would you give for someone who's trying to fundraise in the AI space today?
Yeah. I don't have. I have found the fundraising game in the AI space to be tricky, and just to be really honest, I think that some of the conditions that we've talked about in terms of the pattern matching systems are a little bit out the window. It's hard. It's harder to see the future now with an emerging technology like AI, and so I think a lot of investors in particular are also trying to figure out, hey, how do we evaluate the long-term success of one company versus another? There are companies that have risen up and gotten very big only to have been a little bit early and then not been able to adjust as the technology evolved. We've seen this cycle. The cycle's happening really, really fast right now. And so I think that as we fundraise, especially as like an early stage AI company, being able to demonstrate one that the technology that we are building is real and not vaporware. It's not 100 guys sitting in a room, like we had with Builder.ai, which is just like that's like such a harbinger example for everyone involved there, and that it actually works in a way that is harder to disrupt than easier. I think it's a little bit hard to know exactly where all the disruption is going to come, but the challenge investors face is how do we find the founders that we feel confident in are going to figure it out? How do we find founders that have some kind of a technical motor edge or a go-to-market motor edge that they can capitalize on? And maybe the biggest moats are going to be what data people have. Maybe the biggest moats are going to be what industries people can work with, or what jobs people can do with AI that other people can't. So I think figuring out your moat, your technical advantage, and your customer advantage becomes really important. And it's almost back to fundamentals when it comes to fundraising. And so for us, when we see sort of investors in particular thinking really carefully and wrestling with some of these issues, those are the kind of investors we want to work with, the people who are also wrestling alongside us in sort of where the world is going, because I think it's not 100% clear. I think it's foolish to say you 100% know, and so I want to work with people who are really thoughtful in that way.
Very important. I absolutely agree with that. And I want to take a little detour actually. I had a question. well, that wasn't in the. Can you talk a little bit about your growth and how you've noticed your customers interact with you? What sort of language or words did they use? What sort of phrases do they use? Your early customers.
So I think the early customers were really talking a lot about they're talking a lot about like how they talk a lot about how they can access data. They talk a lot about oftentimes it's very much the customers you have the most success with are let me rephrase this. The customers we have the most success with are the ones that have a concrete problem that they're having trouble solving with traditional technology. And so when we talk to organizations that are saying, it's kind of paradoxical because I actually started in a space where I wanted to talk to people who were saying, we're interested in experimenting with AI, we just don't know how to get there. And actually, the people who have had the best ROI for us as a company have been the people who have said, I have this like really hard task, and I think I have the data that I need, but I'm just having a lot of trouble with it. It's a giant SQL database. It's a we're pulling from 20 different data sets, and one of them is a census, and one of them is an ERP, and one of them is the internet, and we just have to gather all this stuff together because we're putting out this 100-page compliance report and it's due in 2 weeks, and I don't have 2 man weeks of time to get this. Help us grab that data. So people, I think, are inherently cautious when they're presented with the whole world on a plate. It's like, well, you could do anything with this technology. People are like, well, maybe I'll just choose to do none of it because it's all sort of very overwhelming. Versus when you tell a customer, when you talk to a customer and that customer says, actually, I'm having trouble with this like one single thing that's a real thorn in my side. How do I fix that? And then we can say, well, actually, there's a way to make that process much more efficient using the AI tools that we've built. And that conversation is always going to be more fruitful. And then we can have conversations around, hey, wouldn't it be cool if AI could do this as well? Or wouldn't it be cool if we could do this as well? So I'm always listening when people say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? Because that means they're one, super engaged with where the product is right now, and two, can imagine additional use cases and features that we haven't thought of yet. So wouldn't it be cool if is one of our cool and one of our key phrases that we listen for. And then the other thing is we're trying to find matching pattern matching around the types of problems that people are talking about. So maybe a nonprofit has a problem where they're trying to pull a lot of information from different sources. A hedge fund might also have a problem where they're trying to pull a lot of data from different sources and format a document automatically. Those are very different organizations, but their problem might be the same. And so trying to understand how to build tooling that fits a specific problem and then find the customers that are most similar to each other that have those problems. So for us, it's the finance space, even though we've done some work with nonprofits in the past as well.
Are you a two-person team right now? It's you and your co-founder? Okay. Awesome. I love it. Pre-seed as pre-seed as it
As
can get.
pre-seed as it can get. And I think it's cool because especially with the way that like AI native companies can grow so fast without a lot of people, it means that those hires are really, really important. And it means that you can make a huge difference with one or two really key hires. Like I think it's possible that our 10 million ARR version of our product could be 20 people or less. Like I mean, it could be we could stay pretty lean all the way through because I can see sort of where the efficiencies are and the buckets of skills that I need for the team. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of people, but it's hiring the right people with the right mindset in the right spaces.
Got it. Yeah, I love it. So let's move back to our questions. So what would you say is a mindset you're enabling for your customers? What is a shift you're providing?
Yeah, I think I really want to enable a mindset of experimentation with AI. One thing I think about a lot is um, like we all have like older relatives, right? Who, when you see them use a computer, they're clicking around and they move slowly because it's like they're afraid to break the computer, And it's like the reason that they act that way is perfectly logical, right? Is because in the early days of a computer, if you click the wrong thing or you mess something up, it was really hard to fix. And now that personal computers have been around for decades, like it's really, really hard to break a computer with a random mouse click. And so you see people who are cautious based on the environment they came up in, they have no need to be cautious now. And I think that, I'm a millennial. I think millennials and Gen Z, uh, tech users in particular, we want to avoid that layer of being overly cautious and really be able to embrace and use technology super well. So you don't want to be in a situation where 40 years into the future we're also using AI at an extremely rudimentary and cautious level when that caution isn't. We don't need to use that caution. It's hard to break. You can break AI systems easily now, but maybe not so much in the future. So let's create safe environments for experimentation. And when I say safe, I mean safe for the organization, safe from a data privacy perspective, safe from a hallucinations perspective, and let's get people excited to try new things. The mindset, I think, best summed up with the phrase I used before: "Wouldn't it be cool if?"
Hmm. Awesome. I love that. And what phrases or words do you think this new behavior would be associated with? So imagine 10 years from now, you achieve your goal and uh, Thorian becomes the company that sort of creates safe spaces across organizations to be able to experiment with AI and to use AI just the way someone would use an iPhone today. What do you think people would call that, or what words would people associate that behavior with?
Oh man, I love that question. That's also a really hard question. I think it's one of those things where because the language is still in development and we're still working from this rudimentary language perspective, I think it's one of those things where it's not always 100% obvious what everyone's going to be saying. But I think what
Hmm.
people are really going to be thinking about is how people think about their data and their systems is going to change. And in particular, how they use information, where their information is coming from, and how they're evaluating the outputs from what they're putting into their information. All of those things are going to change fundamentally. And so I think, for example, data privacy is going to mean something really different. Um, Data ethics is going to mean something really different. These are going to be important things that we think about a lot. And maybe in 10 years,
Hmm.
they'll be fully embedded in processes that are really mature. I think for us, the language around the use of AI is evolving as the user base is evolving. And so our role right now as founders is to listen and to find the patterns and how people are talking about their problems, and particularly the ones who find their problems are solved really well with AI. What do those people say? For us, it's, hey, it saves us time. It helps us search for things. It creates access when we didn't think we could create something before. We can now create it now. I think that being really thoughtful about listening is the key to both jumping on that bandwagon, jumping on the bandwagon that you're creating the new categories, and naming those categories.
Absolutely. No, that I agree. I think things are evolving, so it's only a matter of time before we know what sort of sticks out and what behaviors start getting named by the masses. Uh, this was the last question on our list. Do you have any advice for naming a new behavior?
Yeah, I think it's listen to your customers first and foremost. And then the second thing is pick something simple. I think that I'm a long-winded guy. I mean, we've just been talking for 40 minutes. I have a ton of words. I talk and talk and talk. The things that really hit are the things that are like when you see it, it really snaps. And I think when you're describing language, I think a good exercise when you're trying to name a new behavior is when someone's describing their problem to you, when they're describing what their work is, and they're using a lot of words, they're being opaque, they're struggling to describe exactly what the problem is. Obviously, the listening technique that follows is you paraphrase back to that person. You say, okay, I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is XYZ. Is that correct? When you do that paraphrase exercise, try to describe what they just said in a very, very simple, very kind of as catchy and simple of a way as you can. Because if you'll be able to see if it resonates. And then we can take that phrase if it resonates. It's like, oh, I described their problem this way. Let me try that phrase on the next customer. And so I think use your customer discovery as a language experimenting lab because we're like we just said, we're building the language of the future right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used the word lab because
Yeah, that's what you all call it
that's
too.
the platform. Yeah, I'm calling it Lingo Lab so that people sort of experiment with how they're describing their problems, how they're describing their solutions to customers. So this actually wraps it up really
Awesome.
well. Thank you so
Of course.
much.